recording again. And if we can, we're recording now. And Your Eminence, if you would kind of give us a little start-off prayer here to get through this next phase, that's always appreciated.
Lord Jesus Christ, our God, please help us in this time of discernment. Send down your grace of your Holy Spirit upon us that we might come to know what your will is for us in this diocese and what we need to do for the well-being of Christ's Holy Church here in the Midwest. Amen.
Amen. Okay. So where we last left the story was trying to really focus down on one or two or maybe three things that are categories. We're going to get to the wording later, but categories right now that we think are the areas that we need to spend the most amount of our effort and energy on to focus on in order so that we can make the greatest impact over the next year or two. And to kind of refresh your memory in that regard, and put back up on the screen here. So when you first looked at the exercise, you were thinking that these were the categories you wanted to focus on. When you then did the survey and were forced to kind of narrow the focus down to three, this is what you came up with. And when we matched them against each other, this is the list of the top four categories over there. And so I don't know if anybody's had any thoughts about these categories and if there's something missing or another way to articulate it or something else, another way to look at it. And again, remember what we're trying to do is focus on the categories of the couple of things that if we can get some disproportionate energy on, we can actually make a bigger impact on the diocese and its parishes. So what are some of the thoughts that y'all have had?
Me being one of the youth proponents, I see youth always up on the list, but always one of those things that are so minimally funded. It just ends up, we will get into the practicalities of everything, and then it'll go back to number 10 or whatever it was. So I just would like to throw that out as just some food for thought. It always seems to happen. Even at the All-American Council, youth was a priority. It became a priority, and then boom, nothing happened. So I just want to point that out.
So you're advocating that should be one of the top one or two or three things that we focus on.
But basically, I've been a youth director for a long time, so I'm kind of my biased opinion, but it just seems to always, everybody says, oh yes, youth. And then we all know it's important, but it just seems like everything else kind of gets in the way. Everything else seems to happen, or people get too busy for it, or it ends up on the bottom of the priority list. So I want to mention that.
Well, if you were going to flesh that out for just 2 seconds now, right? What is it? And I'm not asking you to remember the way we're going to end up driving this is the idea of from X to Y by when, right? We want to have a starting point, we want to have an ending point, we have a deadline attached to it. And later on this evening, you're going to see what the action plan is going to look like and how diligent it's going to be and how His Eminence and the leadership team are going to manage to that so that at the end of the day, whatever it is that makes the list, you're not going to be able to say as to that, we didn't put disproportionate energy. But what are some of the things that you would like to see in that regard? Like what's the issue? What's the disconnect? What's happening? What's the problem?
I think the disconnect happens in money. Yeah. I think it's just lack of communication or lack of know-how.
Oh, it's money.
What do you mean?
So I think that a lot of, when it comes to actually having a program, starting a program, implementing a program, getting it out so people could know it's happening, and for people in the church to actually see it and say, okay, this is happening, let's get it to our youth. Somehow that breakdown of communication happens, and it doesn't really filter down to the level of the kids. I don't know if the priest gets the flyer on his desk or the information on the desk and doesn't pass it on to the parishioners, or I really do think that some of this stuff, when you're doing online ministries or stuff, it doesn't cost much money. It just takes know-how, and it takes support, and it takes people like seeing it and making it a priority.
All of what you said is true. Do you mind if I ask you some follow-up questions to kind of expose this a little bit further?
Certainly.
Okay. And again, I don't want to put you on the spot, and this is not a
No, go for it.
cross-examination. No. And I, don't have, Father Paul's lamp to flash in your face here to make you feel like you're cross-examined here. So let's take the role that you have a program and you have a flyer on it, and you're saying we're not doing a good job of communicating it, right? Is that
Mm-hmm.
what I heard you to say?
Yes,
Why aren't the kids communicating it?
exactly. That's a good point. That's a good point. But the thing is too, that when we do stuff, we do put it on social media, but are they on that particular platform? Like, are they on that Facebook platform? They're not on that anymore. We're using Facebook. We might be using outdated types of technologies that our youth aren't really being privy to. And then the other thing is youth protection laws keep us from actually allowing that to happen fully, because we have to protect our youth. So adults can't really be like myself, even in the parish. I could send information to their parents, but I can't actively just directly communicate with the youth. And that makes it also very difficult from my perspective. But even just getting it to the parents, even just getting it to that point, and it just doesn't seem to be filtering down like that. And I don't know why. And I think it's really, even the All-American Council, I heard a lot of youth afterwards say, well, if I knew it was that amazing, I would have went.
Tell you what, there's so many things to distract.
Right. So
Right.
Their attention. That's the problem.
all right. So I'm gonna keep probing, okay? Because this is what we
Go
do.
for it.
This is what we do when we do root cause analysis.
Bring it.
If anybody who's ever done a root cause analysis, what you know is it's called the 5
Can I
why
hang it?
technique. And in the 5 why
Usually
technique,
go like this more.
you keep asking why and why and why and why and why until you kind of get
Okay.
down to it, right? So I'm just using this as a great example, and I know you have a good spirit, so I know you can handle this. So I got the idea, I got all the limitations, but I'm still not sure I understand, why aren't the kids communicating about it amongst themselves?
I
think they
If you
don't
could answer that question, the best programs that I see that are kind of successful, can I just push it this way, are when kids are excited about it to go.
Yep,
That's the thing.
that makes sense. So I guess, are you reaching a conclusion here now?
Mm-hmm.
And what is that conclusion that you've reached?
That somehow the message needs to get to the kids.
Well, you're not quite where.
And to the point where they're excited about it so that they want to participate.
But is it just that they haven't gotten the message,
No.
or
I
could there
don't
be
know.
another reason?
Maybe it's because our youth program is lousy. And when we try and do
Could
something,
be.
we don't enjoy it.
Yeah, and see, that's really where I was going with that line of questioning. Not, of course, suggesting your youth program is lousy, but here's the point. We know that a committed constituency, when presented with something meaningful, will figure out a way to communicate in the challenge that constituency best communicates, right? So even if you're on the wrong platform, the minute that constituency hears about something that they believe to be valuable, they will use their platform to reach it in the appropriate way. So I think the challenge we have to ask ourselves is, should we improve communications? The answer will always be yes. I've never seen a plan yet that doesn't have some element of improvement of communications that's required. So there's no question about that. The second point of which there's no question is, you're absolutely right. Media attentiveness has moved and migrated, or it's in the process of moving and migrated. Your youth groups will think that Facebook is for us, not for them anymore, and on and on and on it goes. But having said that, if indeed whatever the activity is was an activity that they were excited about, they will communicate about it.
But my problem with that about excitement level is that what is the church supposed to do? Produce clowns and balloons to get people there? I mean, we're always constantly trying to make it like fanatical so that these youth can like be so excited to attend versus just giving them the faith, and there's got to be some type of balance in that, and I don't know. I mean, we can't make kids sit there and listen to stuff. We can't do it.
Are you presuming that are you presuming that they are mutually exclusive?
Well, I mean, so I've been a youth director for a while, Right, a very long time. So, you know, if I have something in the gym that has a bouncy house, I get my 3rd through 5th graders right away.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about that.
Right. Okay. So I know the value of having balloons and clowns.
Yeah, but that's not. I don't think anybody's talking about that. I mean, that's not to say you don't have those things to have fun.
Right.
When you're done with that, can you get me the Windex?
Right. But let me ask you this question.
Mhm.
Do your kids go to any of the religious summer camps?
Oh yeah,
And what's their reaction and feeling when they come back from the summer camps?
they love it because they're together and they feel connected. Of course, we can't do that right now due to COVID.
No.
So those
Again,
are the restrictions.
you're exactly right. Everything has to be caveated by when we're out of COVID, right? I mean,
Absolutely. So-
or put another way, while we're in COVID, we have to do things differently. So I got that.
Right.
And we can go further down the road here, but here's the point that I was trying to, and I thank you so much for being a willing guinea pig in this in the Socratic
Absolutely.
method going back down the road. What we find is that sure, there's social activities that kids love, whether it's dances or parties or bouncy houses or basketball or whatever it is, and that's great. There's no reason why they can't do that.
Mhm.
But what we also find is that high value religious programs are incredibly attractive to kids. So the question then says is it's not like we don't have content that can't be properly delivered in a way to inspire them to understand and live their faith better. It just means that what we've been doing up to now may not have been as consistently effective in that regard, right? So then how would we go about, one last question, then we're going to move back on. What would be some things, or what would be one thing that you would think of that we could do to try and create a more empowering and powerful and engaging religious program for our youth?
At this point, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I was asking you.
Oh, you're asking me?
Yeah, I'm asking you unless somebody else wants to jump in and defend you.
I mean, the problem, okay, so there's one other problem that's very difficult for our particular diocese is how spread out we are. And I know, but there are, in all the different areas within the diocese, I know there's a youth camp. I know there are programs that are already happening within the life of the diocese. And I'm thinking that we might, based upon what we've been talking about, is branch out upon those versus creating a new wheel or helping or supporting the things that already exist more so instead of creating a new wheel.
Right. So I'm sorry, go ahead, Your Eminence. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why camps are so effective and good is that kids, you're in a captive audience. Kids,
Right.
they're together and they don't have the usual stuff they're dealing with every day. Your cell phones get put away, I think, in most cases, and you're in a good way. You're forced to be together and encounter each other. And I think kids, it's amazing how they participate in worship and own the worship and they get excited about it, but you're together and you don't have all this other stuff. I had a priest once tell me, I think it's true, the problem we have today is we have too many choices. We have too many choices in life. And one of the things camp does is it cuts down those choices. It eliminates a lot of choices that allows kids to be together. And that's why I think camp has been, every camp I've been to, I think those have been positive experiences. I visited all the camps that we have in the diocese. There are like 5, and I think I don't hear any kids saying they don't like camp because it's boring. But it's even not that they're just having fun, but they're being taught the faith. They're focusing on worship, and they're building relationships with each other. I know we tried in the diocese for 2-3 years. We had these kind of mini retreats that was a step out and a different way of doing things, but we tried to assemble kids in each deanery and then kind of do live stream these meetings with each other so that the kids gathered in the Chicago deanery could see the kids gathered in the Cleveland Deanery or in the Michigan Deanery, and we had a little program. But I think part of the problem, even with doing that, initially, Father Ben and I had envisioned the idea of making this like an overnight retreat. But then some of the parishes they couldn't get that kind of commitment. So this basically got reduced to like a 3-hour thing that we did Friday night. And then didn't we try and do it then on Saturday? Have we done that yet, Father Ben?
Yeah, we did. So it's always reached about 60 or 70 youth within the diocese. So we would all together get a certain amount. And it was with a certain age group too. It was 6th through 12th graders. So it wasn't like across the board. So, I mean, it was mildly successful, but I wouldn't say it's greatly successful, nor afterwards do I feel like there's this, well, definitely due to COVID, particularly, nobody wants to be online now. But beforehand, we were pretty much doing this, something like this, kind of like a Zoom thing, even prior to before this all was, during COVID. But now we've even decided that we're not going to do anything during COVID. It's just, people are just, kids are online almost every day for school, most of these kids, and why have an online event with youth?
Yeah, we got to look. You're exactly right. We got to look past the COVID period. In other words,
right.
You got to do some patches right now, but we really got to envision what it looks like. All right, so let me just kind of bring this to close. So there's a couple of things that we might, and we could spend a lot more time discussing this, and in a different context, we certainly should. One thing that seemed to me that I didn't hear, and maybe you're doing it, but I didn't hear it, and this is what I was looking for, is, and I'm going to use business terminology, but I will tell you it applies equally however you want to replace the word I'm using it. When you ask your customer what they want, they will tell you. And then you've got to figure out how can you align what they want with what you have to offer and make it a package that is appealing. And to me, what is missing in everything we do, we just use this as an example, but I don't want to keep picking on this example, is we don't take the time to ask the question, what is it that you actually want? What is it you find valuable? So I participated in a couple of breakout sessions with kids that came back from summer camps. And after they get done talking about it at a high level, they need somebody to guide them through the Q&A process to really understand what was it about that experience that made it as impactful as it was. Because these are kids who may have been peripheral Orthodox, but they came back committed Orthodox from that experience. I mean, they wanted to go to confession. I mean, I'll be honest with you, that's not what you normally hear from a lot of young people nowadays, right? But they understood its importance, and they understood, and their confession that they experienced over there was so transformational that they saw amazing value in that they had not ever seen before, right? So when we started to drill down into that and ask them what it was about it, honestly, it had a lot less to do with the things that we adults thought it might have to do with. How nice are the camping facilities, how this and that, but it touched on the interaction and the engagement, right? How did they interact not only with each other, but with those that were teaching them? So the clergy that were teaching them weren't trying to say, now let's memorize what happened at the Third Ecumenical Council and the names of everybody who participated, right? They had figured out a way to make the messaging completely relevant to these kids and to talk to them as if they were not just kids, as if they were adults. So when they wanted to talk about sex, drugs, and rock and roll, they talked about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. The second element there is you've got to have it divided. You cannot have a group as big as 6th grade to 12th grade. Very different constituents, very different customers, right? What they each need and what is age appropriate for them to need and to educate is different. Now, we can go deeper on that. I don't want to divest that, but here's the point I'm trying to get at. What this little example that we've just played out will hopefully prove to you is that no matter what you pick on this list, it's got to begin with research. You don't know what you don't know. You know what you think you know, and what you think you know may be right, but you don't know that it's right until you validated it. And one of the disciplines that we've gotten very lazy with, as I said, none of us would go into a new line of business in our workplace without doing detailed research. None of us would undertake a whole new lifestyle change or no job in our personal circumstance without thinking about it a lot. But in church world, you know, a bunch of grown-ups get together and say, well, let's throw this youth ministry out. I'm not picking on you. I'm just saying as a general rule. Just like a group of, you know, well-intentioned educators come together. Well, let's put this curriculum together. Just like a bunch of clergy come together. Well, let's put this Bible study together, without really actually touching base with the ultimate user, the recipient of those services, and say, what do you need? How can I help you? And then listen, and then tailor, and not try to dictate. And so the humility that this process brings you to is really a very, very uplifting and challenging kind of thing to do. But no matter which one of these areas you pick on, hear me clearly, you're going to have to do some research, because you don't really know what you need to know. Now, I think, Father Drew, you had your hand up earlier. Did you have your hand up earlier?
I did. I just wanted to mention that, you know, initially financial and stewardship was at the top of that list when we talked about it, and all crisscrossed, like you said. And I think the reason for that is that, like, you know, when you think of programs, diocesan programs, for us, it does come down to the money. You know, it does come, you know, we can't have bake sales and ask for volunteers to be youth directors and stuff like that. It really does come down to the money. So, you know, to have clergy recruitment and support and outreach and evangelism in youth, we need some money. And again, I just think that's just the reality of the situation. And I know one of our goals, you know, with His Eminence is to, like, you know, get a financial officer that we pay. So we need the money to pay him, and then have him raise some funds for us. You know, like Lou Scott did years ago. I don't know if you remember his name.
Anthony Scott, yeah.
He started out by raising a tremendous amount of money for the new program, the new building program at St. Vladimir Seminary, of which he was an alumnus. And then later on, he went off in the field and did that for a living. But, you know, you had to pay him. And he said it would often take, you know, he was after people who had money to talk to them. We'd like to do this project. And again, when you do that, you have to, I'm just saying it's a long overdue need of our church on many levels. That's in a nutshell.
Okay, so let me ask you a question to see if you know the answer to this question. And I don't sell anything, folks, but if you're a regular listener to my podcast, you know the answer to this question. What is the average amount that adults spend per child per year on enrichment activities, whether it's sports, music, arts, dance, anything, language, whatever? What's the average per child per year amount that parents spend?
It's a lot.
That's the right answer.
A lot, yeah.
$2,400 per child per year, and that data is now 4 or 5 years old. Okay, so I'm sure it's higher. Now, why do I make that point? The reason why I make that point is money is not the problem. Money's not the problem. I know it seems like the problem.
The product is the problem.
Right. We have not identified something which is so valuable in the minds of the purchaser, whether it's the parents paying it or the kids wanting it, that they say, Mom and Dad, I've got to go to this thing. And I've listened to parents at one of the camps, because they only have 5 weeks based on their circumstances, and they have so many more kids that want to go to it. I've heard parents calling me to complain that they have to wait up until midnight when the online registration process for that camp goes to make sure their kids get registered, and that within 5 minutes the camp is fully done. And these parents are up at midnight. And you know what? The price doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I mean, and so the question becomes back to, do we know what will create the kind of value that people say, this is important? This is something that I want. And by the way, it isn't just jumping balls and basketballs, okay? It can absolutely include, I have seen lock-ins, overnight lock-ins at churches, right? So they just get the kids at the church and the right kinds of leaders in there, and they by age bracket, so you don't have sixth grade in high school, because it's vastly different. They don't want to hang out with each other either anyway. And they'll do a lock-in, and they'll come away with some great things. I've also seen that happen with a men's group. I've seen it happens with a women's group of adults. And by tailoring and really focusing on what added the most amount of value, what we found out was that price was not the issue. And so I want to get us off of I understand the challenge of it. Like I said, I spend, most of my time helping churches and organizations, better understand what stewardship is. But what that is what Father Drew said it was, is we've not created the value proposition yet, which is a real tragedy considering what we're talking about. All right. So let's go back to the big four here. What are your thoughts on, if we were just going to focus on, and again, we got to do a lot of things. That's the 80% of the time we're going to spend with dealing with the whirlwind. But we want to pick one or two, maybe three things that we're going to make a big bet on over the next year or two and really put disproportionate effort, energy, and resources behind. What would make the greatest impact in achieving, and this is why I've got to go back real quickly. I meant to move the slide up here. That would go back to allowing us to achieve the creation of an organization by which we help, get people transformed into Christ's joy, peace, and sacrificial love, so that they can become one with God and one another, and so that ultimately, what we can do is actually fulfill the mission of uniting the faithful in the Diocese of the Midwest to discover Christ-centered life, welcoming all to worship in the Orthodox Christian faith. The what we do, okay? So what are the one or two, three things most that you think we should be focused on that would allow us to best achieve our why and our mission?
My initial thought is whatever you pick, the second one has to be financial and stewardship. I don't think you can kind of focus on the other three because they go hand in hand. I mean, when you're dealing with, whether it's outreach and evangelism, youth, or clergy recruitment and support, well, I think the financial has to go right along with that, because I think if we're going to equip people with resources, then I think that has to be there. But I agree with you, it's the product that matters, and that's what that is what encourages people to give. So I don't know, yeah. But I think the two, I just think the financial and stewardship needs to go along with whatever the other three we pick. I myself am more inclined towards clergy recruitment and support because I see it as being a very pressing issue in our diocese. We have clergy that are retiring. We have some people going next year. We're gonna have a good number of students going to seminary, but I mean it's not keeping up with where we're at. So I do think the clergy recruitment and support is a big issue right now.
All right. What other thoughts do we have?
I think the clergy recruitment and support will come out of youth and evangelism, because we tend to get people either who have gone through youth programs and find a sense of vocation, or people who have come in and have eagerness and end up going to seminary or whatever. So I think that those are very interrelated too.
I would agree with you, except that means, though, that that may be a way off. I mean, youth have to develop that love for the church, and I've run into kids in my pair of visits that I remember seeing this one kid, I think in Parma, 3 years old, and I said, that guy's going to be a priest one day. You could just tell right away. I mean, just by the way they were acting, and you could see that. I mean, but obviously you can't nurture vocations You just need to keep on doing what's going on with that kid that causes me to think, man, that guy's going to be a priest one day. You know, what's happening with that kid? That's what I'm kind of like amazed by.
The force is strong with that one.
Well,
it's family too. It's family. I mean, that, I think I know who you're talking about. That's the father giving real direction, and, you know, it's just a really strong family, strong in the faith.
No.
All right.
So we've talked about this stuff, and through this, I mean, obviously there must be data somewhere about all this stuff, but I don't know where it is. I mean, you said that, so clergy recruitment is going to be a real problem and a critical problem. I don't know particularly the numbers or the, you know, what's going on. I mean, does everybody know this?
I think he has put together some stuff on that. I think there's been some work done on that.
Yeah, we've got data, but let me address that in a different way, Marianne, and that is, one of the things you're going to find out when we actually start to look in a little bit about what do these action plans look like is, every group, regardless of how many groups get formed, their first step is going to be doing some research. Now, will I be able to accelerate that research for them? Sure. Are there other resources out there that they're going to look at? You darn betcha there are. But what I'm hopefully trying to make sure that everybody gets through is we are not going to be sitting at a diocese council level and deciding things without validating that this is the best thing we can do, this is the most valuable thing, this is the most impactful thing we can do. Not to say your judgment isn't valuable, but your judgment needs to be supported with some form of empirical basis to say this is going to be meaningful. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So what areas, you know, and again, forget the language for a second, because we're going to tweak language later on, but what areas do you think are most critical important? Is this it? Is there something that's missing from this? Is there something that's on it that you think is less important?
I don't know if there's something that would be on the list, but it just seems like all of these are kind of blanketed in apathy. It's the attitude of the members, where it doesn't matter what we put on the list. If they're not in for the fight, they're not excited about it, what difference does it make what we put on the list? That's just kind of maybe it's 35,000 foot level or whatever, but I think it's just more about attitude.
Just going with the clergy recruitment, you know, we can come up with lots of great ideas, but I know we'll get shot down by the synod, because the synod has their own standards of, you know, clergy needs to go to seminary for 1 year. And I mean, we can come up with great ways to bring in, you know, men who want to become priests or deacons and that. But then there's these other hoops that are beyond our control. And that's, again, going back to apathy. And we can come up with this great list and great way to bring people. But I know, you know, as a priest and being a dean, that it's going to get shot down by the synod. So we're kind of like powerless in that certain way to even focus on that.
All right, so I always welcome. Thank you for sharing, Father. So I always welcome when
thank you for sharing that, Father Douche.
No, but I mean, I'm going to take it in a good direction. So hang on here for a second. So one of my theories that I have established is what I call Bill's 3-bucket theory, right? Every problem, every issue, every challenge fits into one of 3 buckets. Bucket number 1, the things you control. Bucket number 2, the things you can influence. Bucket number 3, the things you can't do a darn thing about. We love to obsess with bucket 3 issues, you know? If only they would do this or fix that or da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And if it's out of our reach, my rule is if it's in bucket 3, I don't even think about it. If there truly is nothing I can do about it, then it ain't even on my radar screen. So the question we can start to do, though, is say, what's in bucket number 1 and what's in bucket number 2? Now, sometimes there are things that we think are in bucket 3 that are surprisingly in bucket 2, but we just haven't figured out a way to make it happen yet, right? So I don't know that this is a good example, Father, but it may be that if all of a sudden you came up with a better way, a better mousetrap to, let's use those 2 words, and I'm not limiting it to those 2 words, recruit and support clergy, and it was bang-a-rang good, and you went to the synod and said, or not you, or maybe you, or maybe you or somebody else, or maybe me or somebody goes to the synod and say, this is my question that I always ask, how's what you're doing working for you, right? And we always hear, well, it's not working as good as we'd like it. Okay, great. So that all confesses that we got to make a change. Here's something that seems to have worked. Well, that's not the way we do things. Well, I know, but how's what you're doing working for you, right? And so you ask that question enough times, and then sometimes people say, okay, well, let me take a look at that again. And maybe there is something in there that you can influence. But truly, if there is an issue that you cannot influence at all, don't even worry about it. Don't even think about it. Let's stay focused on the things we absolutely can control and the things that we can start to influence. And so in the context of clergy, and recruitment may be the wrong word, let's just call it broader area of clergy support. Are there things, do you think that is one of the most critical things that we need to focus on in our diocese?
Yeah.
You think? So
Yes.
All right. So Father, if it is, what is it that you think that is in bucket 1 and bucket 2 for us? Give me some examples of things that you think we could control and we can influence.
I think number 1 is, first of all, you can't recruit somebody and have a wholehearted recruitment to ask a man to leave, go to school for 1 to 3 years with his family, most of them at the age that they're now doing it. They're usually married with children, to finish that education with a student loans, and then put them into a parish where they're making poverty wages and they have to go on public support systems. I think we can address that. I think we can stop that. I think also that we can, if we want to keep that type of a parish going, if it's a mission parish, then we need to support the priest, and we're trying to do that on a small scale. But I think they can be in bucket 1 and bucket 2, but we have about it.
Okay.
And we can enable parishes. I've been doing this for 20 years since I was the dean and then chancellor. You can't enable the older parish that still thinks the paying a priest $15,000 a year is enough for him to live on, and what more does he need? We gave him that palace of a parish home for him to live in, that he better keep the way we want it kept. We can stop that. We have, and his Eminence, referred to one priest that might have said maybe we should have 2 parishes combined. Maybe we need to in cities like Chicago, Cleveland, where we have numerous parishes that some of them are hospice parishes, and we have to do something about it. So they can be in bucket 1 and 2. I'm sorry,
right.
I'm passionate about that. So.
No, listen, you're exactly right, and I know this is always troubling to some people to acknowledge, but sometimes an organization has lived its useful life. It's lived a good life. It's time to do a memorial service and move on from there. And that's true of any organization. That's true of any institution that isn't grounded in eternal opportunities. And if you've got a parish that is so myopically driven that it can't see past its ancient institution, is trying to apply, that's why I spent so much time at the beginning giving you how fast things are changing, today's time, and they're trying to apply last century's time on today. Sometimes you just got to let it die, and that's hard, but that's the right answer. That's pruning. I mean, everybody has pruned things periodically because they know that's how the broader body grows, and you find a way to deal with the people involved in it. So I agree with you, Father. Those things are things you can control and things you can influence. All right. Yes. I can't see all the pictures here, so.
We can control. We have an excellent diocese, an excellent bishop, and I know, priests that would want from outside the diocese and outside the jurisdictions that would want to come into our parish or come into our diocese. But again, we can't control that because that's under, you can't go, again, as Father John said, we can't do recruitment outside the diocese. But one thing that we do have, which is a positive, is we have an excellent bishop, an excellent diocese that we can, if it was possible to, put out, recruit priests from outside the diocese to come in there. So that's a positive, but I don't think it's it's not in our reach because it goes beyond, synod rules and bishop rules and stuff like that.
Yeah, but there's ways to make that happen. Okay, Father Drew, and then I'm going to move us on. Go ahead.
I'm just going to pick up on what Father Zdenek said about, what can we offer these priests that give up a lot for their, and then go into maybe our model in America needs to change for what the priesthood is. And Father John can speak to this, and he'll admit that it was hard, but he was a tent maker priest, and he worked a secular job, and he serviced the parish. That now it's a full blown official parish. It's doing well, but he brought it up from the ground up, I think that really needs to be more what we're telling our potential priests. You need to get a degree in something that can butter your bread, and then we could send you anywhere. We could send you to a little dying parish, maybe somewhere that could use some help, and maybe you can bolster it, and maybe you could bring it back to life, or maybe we could send you to Nowheresville to start a new parish. But I mean, the old model of the full Benny package and the full salary. I mean, I think maybe them days is over.
What would make you believe that? Because what would make you believe that?
The reality of what our churches are. Like, look at Eastern Pennsylvania. They're all a bunch of parishes with 25 people in them.
All right.
Sometimes less.
Okay. So
I'd like to put forward this idea of what is a healthy tent maker priest. I think there's ways you can be a tent maker priest and not kill the priest and the family.
We could talk to Father Dan Reynolds about that.
And I think this is where, I think there's a way you can Father Dan Reynolds a good example. Where he built up the church he started the mission, he started the Cincinnati church, then he went on to Columbus, and, he was a teacher. And
my good friend, Father Alexander Fedorov was a tent maker priest until probably the last 15 years of his priesthood.
Yeah. So I think there's ways that we've had, it's not all bad. I may tell you, we've had 2 or 3 parishes where a priest has been sent into a dying parish. I think of Father Proctor in St. Paul, Minnesota, Father Joshua Frigerio in Holy Ascension in Albion. They went into parishes that were at the point of being closed 15 years ago. But because they had a livelihood, they went in there, and by the grace of God and because of the gift they had as a priest, these dying parishes have both become vibrant, solid parishes that have found new life. And I remember going to Holy Trinity in St. Paul for the 100th anniversary, and with the photo we had a photo shot of 150 people in that shot. And when Father John and his wife Vera got there, they were looking at 17 people, and they all hated each other. I mean, so there's this grace of the Holy Spirit that I think, and a lot of it has to do with the person you put there and how God uses that person, and it can happen.
It can, Vladika. And the truth of the matter is, when you are a tent maker priest, you are less restricted than the priest who is totally on the salary of the parish.
Yeah.
You have a leverage that's, and I hate to use it in those terms, but you're not threatened by someone complaining about you and getting you taken out of your parish or what are you going to do or what have you. You can stand the fight. You can, because it is a battle to go into some of those parishes because, my experience in that particular parish was I was dealing with a large group of Eusebius Stephanou followers. To bring them to orthodoxy was a difficult task, and I was able to do that. I could stand that ground. So you also, and you're not dependent totally on that. So you can take a risk in evangelizing and bringing the faith to people without worrying about other threats coming against you. But it also takes its toll over time. And because while doing a tent maker priest, I happened to have a job. I was in healthcare administration. I was able to have a job that gave me some flexible hours. We had a full liturgical life. Not everybody liked it. People complained because we had vigil. I said, at the end of Vespers, go home. We'll continue with Matin.
All right.
It wasn't a problem. So we were able to do that. What are you going to do?
So this is a much deeper conversation. I'm not trying to cut it off, but I want to kind of bring us back into focus over here. But before I do that, I'm going to pull the pin on a hand grenade, drop it, and then run, okay? I believe that if you accept the compromise that the only way you'll be able to grow your parishes and your diocese is by deploying, I'm going to use the phrase now, I was not as familiar with it before, tent maker priests, I think you're going to fail. I think you're going to fail over the long haul. And I know that is very provocative. There is no reason why a viable parish, and that's going to be the big question, cannot support full-time a priest. And you will never have a growing community to its fullest potential if you don't have somebody who all day, every day wakes up and that's all they're worried about is all the faithful in that parish. And I absolutely agree with everything y'all said about, hey, listen, you can take more chances if you got another job because you can say forget about it. But I honestly don't think, and again, I'm not trying to get preachy on y'all because y'all are the clergy, right? But I don't think Christ said to the tax guy and to the fisherman, hey, listen, keep your day gig, and while you're at it, do what you can. I think we're actually challenged to be full-time in this regard. And if the only impediment, now if you told me the impediment was something different, I'd say, well, then let's talk about it. But if you're telling me the only impediment is money, then that's something that is absolutely within our control, absolutely something we can do something about. And if that's the imperative, then that's one of the things that we have to do something about. Folks, let me make it simple for you. Let me just give you a simple number for you to walk away with. Do you know what the proxy median income of Orthodox Christians are in the United States as of 2016? The number's higher now, but I'm going to give you 2016 numbers because that's reliable. Median income. Half the people make more, half the people make less. What do you think that median income is?
120,000.
Spoken like a good hierarch.
I don't know. I
think it's jurisdictionally. I think the Greeks make more and the Antiochians make more than the OCA people.
You would be wrong in that assumption. The highest income are people in America, in the Orthodox ecosystem, are people who claim any lineage to Russian and Russian countries. They're at the top of the economic food chain.
What?
The Greeks are below the median. But I'll just fast forward the data for you. $73,200.
Really?
$73,200. Now, that does not include all the converts that came in because what we're tracing is people who claim any lineage to any of the historically Orthodox countries. Okay, so I can give you more data on that later. Here's the point I want to take away. If we taught and practiced tithing, that would mean that every parishioner would give us $7,320. Now, of course, not every parishioner is making the median. Half make more, half make less. But we use the median because the people that make more would be giving us more.
That's my salary, Deb.
And the people who make less would be giving us less, right? So here's the simple math I want you to do. I want you to multiply the number of families you have in your church by $7,320. That should be your stewardship budget. Is there any parish in your diocese that cannot, in that context, support a full-time priest? Other than a brand new mission parish of maybe 20 families, the answer is no. So, if it sounds like I'm getting in your face, please forgive me, I probably am. We do not have a money problem. You know, the old joke that they tell in church circles, heck, some of y'all probably used it in homilies, you know, where the priest stands up before the congregation and says, I got good news and bad news. The good news is we got all the money we need for everything. The bad news is it's still in your pockets. So maybe Vladika's right, is that really we need to focus on the stewardship side of the equation, but you will never convince me, and I've got the data, that you cannot afford to have full-time, 100% dedicated clergy and 100% full-time dedicated staff, which can include pastoral assistants, youth directors, et cetera, at virtually every one of your parishes. But to do that, we actually have to engage people in a true understanding of what stewardship is all about, which is, I think, why His Eminence was saying he wants that one to be on the list. So we're going to spend a lot more time talking about this in greater detail, but let me tell you what I'm sensing from this. What I'm sensing from this is that there is enormous energy behind having one of the critical focuses being clergy, and there is enormous focus on the whole financial stewardship side. Am I misreading that analysis from all this kind of wide-ranging conversation? Does that sound like what I'm hearing? Okay. Is there a third? I'm sorry, did I cut somebody off?
I was just saying what you're saying. It was a financial. I think with our what we did with the 13% from the parishes, I think that's helping. It's been the diocese has been in the black and it's been doing good. So I think on the parish level, with the 13% proportional parish giving, has been doing the diocese is doing good on that respect. I think it's the parishes want to, they're seeing the diocese as taking their money in that certain way. Yeah. And so they're closing, you know, and that's what closes the parishes down, that, you know, there's a disconnect between the diocese and the parish. And, you know, this is the money for the parish that they're making for their community. So I think that disconnect is happening in that. So
what are we getting for our money that we give to the diocese? What are we getting?
Yeah.
Well, you get a priest. You get a priest. That's for sure. You know?
No, he was saying that's what the question that he hears all the time, right?
Yeah. No, I think the thing is the diocese, we're working on that. We're working on that. My problem listening to all this is I don't know if you want to put us on a pace that's too fast. I work like a turtle. I process things slowly, and the only thing I can say, the turtle finishes the race. And, you know, I have a sense of where I want to go, but people, I can only go as far as people are willing to follow. And somehow, how do we nurture that willingness to follow? And because I don't know, I think, I don't know. So
that's why I think what you're playing with now, Bill, is what we have to address next. No. Because, you know, Vladika's right. That's the question. What do we get from the diocese? What do they do for us? And it comes down to the question, why we send this money there, what have you. But there's the apathy because there's no education about what the church is, we need to somehow do that, of what the church is and what we're trying to accomplish, instead of just doing it at our diocesan council meetings or even at the assembly. Same people most of the time come to the assembly, they hear it, they never take anything home with them.
Right.
I also think that so much of this comes back when we're talking about clergy recruitment and support to, clergy development, pastoral development, learning. We have to we have to sharpen the saw. We all know what the saying is, so goes the priest, so goes the parish. So much of what's not working, so much of what our deficiencies are really, ride upon, what I think we do as clergy or what we're not doing as clergy, where we're failing and where we're deficient, and to be ask those really hard questions about ourselves, that we're afraid of, asking in order to, reach out to someone else who can help us, mentor us. I think that, so much of the health of our church is going to be on its leadership in all capacities, not just priest or not just the bishop, but in lay leadership as well. I mean, everything rises and falls on leadership. We spent 5 months on 2 Corinthians with my parish, again, a Zoom Bible study. And, 2 Corinthians is about apostolic leadership, delegating to local communities, finding in those communities persons who could, take on the apostolic ministry, beginning, with the presbyter. That was, one of St. Paul's emphases within that beautiful letter. And also in the letter to Titus as well. Leadership, is everything.
This is Simeon. I'd like to jump in and really echo what Father Paul was saying and perhaps expand a little bit with respect to apathy. I think in terms of leadership and the delegation of authority, particularly to people who are happy and joyful to do the things they are delegated to do. And I think that one of the things that I think is, in my opinion, because I was one of the people that said that I think we have a good hierarch. I think one of the things that I've enjoyed seeing in Archbishop Paul's reign as ruling hierarch in this diocese is that he seems to be able to look around and find people who have a particular skill set or are interested in particular things and say, look, I know that you are interested in this, and that because of your interest, if you harness that and use that interest for the betterment of the church, you are not going to be apathetic, right? You're gonna come to work joyful, right? And the stuff you will do will be joyful, and it will be glorious, right? The elder Abilianos from Athos had this idea of the liturgy being this glorious thing at the center of the monastic life, right? And I was sort of thinking about this about that point because I was listening to something that Archbishop Alexander was talking about recently, and I thought, like, how can getting that joyfulness, getting that gloriousness into our lives is an important thing to do. And what I came up with is trying to figure out ways in which people can harness their talents to their to the activities of the church. And there are so many activities that in the church that need that, right? I mean, you just have to look at Bill. Bill seems to enjoy what he's doing. He has found a niche for himself where he's a compelling speaker, right? And I think there, not all of us are like that, but there's certainly, in my funny old way, I enjoy doing some like number crunching, and somehow Vladika put me on the finance committee. At some point we might have a discussion about why that happened. But this is something that I'd like to do, and I think that sort of, I guess, discernment or so forth can be a way in which to overcome apathy. I'm Canadian by background, and I learned most of my sort of organizational sort of thoughts and attitudes from hockey, and we call this slotting, right? You need to get your slotting right and put people in places to flourish. And I think if we do that, I think we go quite a bit along the way of getting ourselves out of the apathy swamp or molasses.
Yeah, Bill, when you added the words engagement and education, I think that's the bridge help us in clergy development and stewardship, because we need to cultivate that sense of engagement and education, and that means the active involvement of people. And I think that probably in some ways that's a key thing we need to address. If there's one thing I've learned about this that I know as I've been trying to sort out the ministries of the diocese, I've become more aware of the fact that education is going to be very important, because it's through education that we can find a way to engage people. But the sense of engagement is really important, because it gets us out of this apathy mode and into what can I do to help?
Right, right. And to echo both what you just said and what Simeon said just a few minutes ago, let me again try to challenge you to think differently, right? Because that's really what I'm trying to do, is to, and if you say I'm uncomfortable and I don't want to do it, that's fine, but at least want you to have thought through it. So when you look at organizations that are successful, and leave it to a Canadian to pick a hockey team to do that, right? But that's a good analogy, and we could look at other examples. I don't know how many of you are familiar with tools like the Myers-Briggs personality surveys or the Enneagram. There are tools out there that are validated to give you an idea of the way you think, the way you process, the way you act, okay? And even if it's wrong by 10 or 20%, the order of magnitude, it's probably in the right sweet spot. What we find is that in successful organizations, they have matched the team to their strengths and weaknesses to reach a level of effectiveness that each of the individual players will not. It's the reason why when you see teams made of superstars, they stink, because they don't learn how to play together with a team. If you look at the history of the greatest basketball player of all times, of course I'm speaking of Michael Jordan, when he went from UNC to the Bulls, they were in last place. But the next year, when Phil Jackson shows up, when Scottie Pippen shows up, all of a sudden they're number one, and they keep being number one. Why do they keep being number one? They had crazy people in there. I mean, you're not going to tell me Dennis Rodman isn't from a foreign planet. I mean, it is what it is. And yet year after year after year after year, what they did was they melded together their different strengths and weaknesses and team capabilities. And I've seen it demonstrated, just so you can understand, I've seen it demonstrated in nonprofit world and profit world. When I became managing partner, one of the things we did was I took my partners through an exercise where we looked at that. And here's what we learned. I learned that when I'm talking to partner A, if I speak this way, he's not going to get it, because that's just not the way he thinks. When I speak to partner Y, if I say this, she's not going to get it, because that's not the way she thinks. If I ask partner Z to do that, that's a huge mistake, because that's not the way not the way partner Z works. Well, why doesn't the same thing exist in church world? Are all of a sudden our major profile characteristics not applicable in church world? Of course they're applicable in church world. And when you start to see that, what we can see is how we can form better relationships and better teams. It doesn't change your personality, but what it does mean is when I'm speaking to you, I have to communicate a little differently because of the way you process information. And so as we start to envision a more efficient and effective diocese and parish, we have to start imagining how could we use these existing tools. So we take really great priests and we put them in really crappy environments. I'm not saying His Eminence does that, but I'm saying that's kind of something that happens in Clergy Assignment 101. Well, maybe that priest is a good turnaround. Maybe he's a Father Michael Kaiser and he can turn around parish after parish after parish after parish, right? Maybe that is going to kill him because that's not where his skills are. Maybe he's the guy that takes it from this plateau to that plateau. My point in all of this saying is back to what Father Paul said. When we start to think about clergy, we need to be thinking about it in a more holistic sense about clergy development. In other words, who are you? What do you know? What are your weaknesses? What do we need to, what do we need to strengthen? What are, frankly, you so good at? You could mentor other clergy and other deacons and other young men to do that kind of stuff, right? And really starting to look at development of our clergy as you're not done the minute you graduate from seminary, right? On the same side, on the engagement side, to the point you were making, Your Eminence, if we can provide the necessary education to engage our stewards in understanding what does it mean to be given a calling by God, whatever that is, right? Whether it's building and grounds or, you stick Simeon in the financial statements, right? Whatever it is, it is. And then we can actually start to transform people and transform parishes. So what I think you're focusing in on now is two areas is really clergy development, and then I'm just going to put the word laity in front of it, laity, engagement, stewardship, and education. Again, we can tweak words later. If we could get these two things optimized, would things be materially better in all aspects of the diocese, or in most of the aspects of the diocese? Is there anybody that thinks that we're missing something or this wouldn't help? Now, don't ask me the how question yet. We're going to get to that in a little bit. Because I've made His Eminence very uncomfortable, which is kind of my job. I told you I didn't want y'all sleeping well at night, right? But I'm going to make you real comfortable by the end of this session.
I think we should say something about for ministry. Laity, education, stewardship, and education for ministry.
Well, just out of curiosity, I'm just asking. I'm not fussing. I'm just trying to understand it. What does that include that's not included here, and why is that important?
Because it includes actually all the things that we're not going to name that are down below.
Okay, I got your point. Yeah.
Youth. And so it's saying that what are we going to educate them for? We're going to educate them for all the development of ministries.
Okay.
That's part of the engagement.
Right. So I hear what you're going to say. What can I ask you to hold that thought? Because you are 100% right. But I'm going to suggest that we maybe can deal with it a different way. Okay? But you are 100% right in that regard, because the point that Father's making is, listen, if we have our laity educated and engaged and understanding their role as stewards, guess what's going to happen? It doesn't matter which ministry you pick. Outreach and evangelism, we're going to get the right people in there doing it. Youth, we're going to get the right people in there doing it. Charity, we're going to get the right people in there doing it. Whatever the case may be, we're going to get the right people in there doing it. So I think you have... But we're going to come back to that, Father. I'm not holding you out here. And again, the wording on all of this is going to change when the groups get formed and you define it, right? So I'm just putting placeholders right now. Is there a consensus that the two biggest things that we could do that would have the greatest impact on our diocese and our parishes is clergy development and basically laity development? Show me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Give me some visual prompts over here, okay? You with me? All right. Let's assume that's the case. Let us assume that's the case. And we've got a little bit of a time before we were going to take our dinner break, and I would like to use that time to move us to the next level before we take our dinner break. The good news in all of this, my brothers and sisters, means we're going to end early, which I know will offend all of you. So I'll be happy to stay on for any of you that want to, and we can engage in whatever conversation you want. But let me segue over to the next topic, because eventually I want to bring you to the point of where we're going to end up and how this is going to make His Eminence get so happy that he's going to be a turtle, but we're going to be strapping him on a Tesla rocket ship that's gonna fly exactly where he wants it to go.
That ain't gonna happen.
Hey, listen, I still think that's bucket 2 for me, so I'm going with it, okay? Anyway, we'll see, Your Eminence. All right. So let's talk about kind of, we're not going to take the dinner break now. We're going to take it at the normal time. Let's segue over and start to talk about the other key message that I need to make sure you understand in the context of the 4 disciplines of execution. And that's the difference between lead measures and lag measures, okay? So the second of the 4 disciplines, we've already finished the first one. We haven't actually finished it because we haven't come up with the wording of the wildly important goals. You all will come up with that when we form the separate groups, but we know the 2 categories of where those wildly important goals are going to be. The second thing I want you to focus on is understanding what is a lead measure and what is a lag measure and why is this relevant in this context. So again, quick review. Lag measures track the success of the overall wildly important goal. So again, if we were going to use stewardship as a wildly important goal, we could actually track where are we, how much progress have we made, and at the end of every month, at the end of every quarter, at the end of every year, you can take a look at it. Now again, at the end of every quarter, month, and year, there's nothing you can do about it because that month, quarter, and year has already happened, but it's a lagging measure. The lead measure are the things that you can track that drive a lag measure. They are the things that will influence the lag measure you're trying to accomplish. Because again, as I said, by the time you see a lag measure, the performance that drove them is already passed and you can't fix it. Whereas lead measures are predictive of the success of the lag measure, assuming you can influence them. So if they are influenceable and they're the right lead measures, then they can be predictive of your lag measure. Now, let me give you a simple analogy that every one of you can understand. I'm not speaking about you, so I don't want anybody to take what I'm getting ready to say next personal. I'm speaking about me. I have been indeed losing the same 25 pounds for the last 25 years very unsuccessfully, okay? So that just is the truth, because guess what happens? Every day I get up in the morning and I stand on the scale and the dang thing gives me the wrong number. It is wrong. Last week I went to the doctor. What's the first thing you do when they go to the doctor? They insist on weighing you. As I was walking up, I pointed to the machine. I said, "Ma'am, your machine is broken." She goes, "How do you know it's broken?" I said, "Trust me, I know it's broken." So I stood on it. She gave me the number. I said, "See, I told you it was broken. It's supposed to be 25 pounds less." Now, that is a true statement. I wish it weren't, but it is a true statement. So let's break down on that, and let's look at the difference between lead and lag measures. Lead measures, remember, are predictive. Lag measures are what is the consequence. So going back to this analogy, the lag measure is 25 pounds less than what my current weight is. That's the lagging measure. At the end of a period, whatever that period we decide, that lag measure has to be current weight minus 25. What are the leading measures that would drive that lag measure? There are 2 of them. Come on now, y'all been fighting the same battles I have.
Calories and activity.
Bingo.
Diet and exercise.
Diet.
There it is. Diet and exercise. Caloric intake, exercise output, right? So instead of saying my goal is to lose 25 pounds in a year, what if I said my goal is today to consume 20 less calories, and my goal this week is to exercise 3 more hours? If I calibrate the right leading measures and I manage to those leading measures, guess what happens the next time I go into my doctor's office and stand on that scale, or the next time after the end of the time period? So I use that as an analogy of something you can understand. Here's the problem. If we are managing to the lag measure, we're never going to change the result. If we manage the lead measures, we will change the result and we'll get the lagging measure we want. So again, to be a valid lead measure, it has to be predictive. If I do this thing, I can predict that my lag measure will change. If I exercise more by a certain amount, I can predict I'll get a better answer on the weight. If I eat fewer calories or the right kind of food, I can predict I'll have a better outcome. So that would be a valid lead measure. And it also has to be influenceable directly, not just by the bosses, in this case His Eminence, but by the individual people that are engaged in it, right? So in my example, it is 100% influence. I can control the amount of time I spent exercising, and I can control what I intake. Even if my wife makes a wonderful meal and it's got all the wrong things in it, I can choose not to eat it and choose to eat something positive. Now, it's always the opposite in my case because she's a good vegan and she cooks great food and I'm the one eating donuts, okay? So let's get clear. So it's got to be predictive and it's got to be influenceable by the people who we're holding accountable for this. So go back to Father's earlier comment about, well, I'd like to fix that, but I can't fix that. Bucket 3, it's not influenceable by you. That's not a good lead measure, right? All right. I love Edwards Deming, who's the father of the quality movement, who once said, managing an entity by looking at year-end data is like driving a car by looking in the rearview mirror. Because that's really what we try to do when we manage based on those back-end numbers over there is, you don't drive by looking in the rearview mirror. But if we can act on lead measures, it's merely applying focus and disproportionate energy to those activities that will drive the lag measures, okay? So let me do another example, a live example over here. What do you think is the best luxury global hotel chain? Who wants to put their vote in?
Hilton.
Hilton?
Carlton.
Ritz-Carlton. Who else?
Airbnb.
All right. There's I'm sorry?
Four Seasons.
Four Seasons. Okay. Airbnb. That's good. There's a comedian in every crowd over here. I'm glad to see we got a warm up back before dinner. Well, several of those that you chose would probably make the list. The one that routinely scores at the highest on all of the standards is the Ritz-Carlton. So let's use the Ritz-Carlton as an example, but I'm not denying that it can't also be Four Seasons. Your Eminence, your Hilton experience is better than my Hilton experience, but that's okay, all right? And so when we look at a Ritz-Carlton, we will find that they actually applied a version of the 4 disciplines of execution to become the chain that puts them at the top of everything, okay? If you're interested, a fascinating book that I would ask you to read is a book called Excellence Wins by Horst Schulze. Horst Schulze is the guy that made Ritz-Carlton. He's the guy that created Ritz-Carlton, made it what it is. If you don't want to read the book, I've provided you a link to 2 30-minute podcasts by Andy Stanley, who runs the second largest church in America, the North Point family of churches in Atlanta, who has a leadership podcast, and he interviewed Horst Schulze, okay? And you can learn everything you need to know about why Ritz-Carlton became who they were in the context of excellence. Okay, but let's look at how does this apply to what we're talking about and our desire to look at empirical data. So what are some of the most important lag measures that the Ritz-Carlton, or for that matter, any good hotel would measure? What are some of the good lag measures that they would measure? If you were running a hotel chain and you asked your people to give you a report, what would be some of the things you would want in the report?
Profitability.
Profitability, yep. What else?
Attendance.
Satisfaction surveys.
I'm sorry?
Satisfaction surveys.
Customer satisfaction surveys, yep. What else?
Return customers.
Return customers. Man, you guys are absolutely brilliant, or you cheated and you look at this presentation again. They are customer satisfaction scores, repeat visits or rebooking at a Ritz-Carlton, right? In other words, even if I don't go to that same Ritz-Carlton, the next time I'm traveling to Cleveland, I'm going to look for a Ritz-Carlton in Cleveland. And then the customer spend either per day or for the whole stay. Those are critically important lagging measures that you would look at to determine the success of your organization, right? Now, those are lag measures. Again, at the end of the stay, I get a customer sat score. At the end of the stay, I find out whether they book again in another month or 2 or 3. And at the end of the stay, I know how much they spent per day or per year. All lag measures, very important lag measures. We need to measure them. The question that Horst Schulze asked himself, what is the predictor of those lag measures? In other words, if there was one thing I could do and there was only one thing I could do, what is the most important thing that I could measure that would influence those 3 lag measures? Anybody who didn't look ahead want to guess? All right, I won't make you wait forever. What they determined in detailed analysis at the Ritz-Carlton, it was employee satisfaction. It wasn't how much they spent on the hotel. It wasn't how fresh the flowers were. It wasn't the property location where it was. What they found perfectly correlated was the more satisfied the employees were in every hotel where they had high employee satisfaction, they had high customer satisfaction, high spend per day, and high return repeat business. And if you think about it, he then said, on the basis of that, I need to completely change the way I think about my employees. So to Horst Schulze and the management of Ritz-Carlton, who was his customer? It was his employees. He invested everything in his employees because he knew that if he had the best, most well-trained, most satisfied employees, the rest of it's going to take care of themselves. It's the reason why, and I don't know how many of you know this or not, every employee at the Ritz-Carlton, from the lowest level employee to the general manager, has a dollar amount authority that they can credit you for something that goes wrong. Even the maid in the room can credit you a certain dollar amount. It varies depending on their status. If you're not satisfied with something, boom, on the spot, no questions asked. And you know what else? There's no questions asked. When they make that decision, they never get second guessed. Management never says, well, now, wait a minute. Why did you give Marianas this $200 discount? I mean, what was really, no. And what they did was Horst Schulze went to his lowest level of employee, the people that were the janitors, and the people that worked in the back offices, and the people that worked in the kitchens. And what he said to them is, you are ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. And he elevated them in their own mind to what they were trying to do. And what he made them understand is, you are a lady and gentleman, just like the guests that we have are ladies and gentlemen. So how would you like to interact with each other? It's the reason why when you go to a Ritz-Carlton, you will never walk by any employee who doesn't greet you. And doesn't just say, oh, hey. I mean, they actually greet you and look at you, because that is enculturated in who they are. And what they found over and over and over and over again was anytime they had a Ritz-Carlton that was having a problem, it had nothing to do with the grandeur of the hotel or the freshness of the food or flowers. It had everything to do with employee satisfaction. So this, they became aware of, was the lead measure that drove all 3 lag measures. Now, guess what happens? They provide disproportionate effort and energy on the lead measure, and boom, everything starts taking care of itself. When I was confronted with this and I started thinking about it in the world, in my world, right, and when I was managing partner of a law firm, guess who I decided was the most important people that were involved in our law firm? Now, those of you who don't know law firms, there's, us equity partners, we split the profits, we have a stake in it. Then there's non-equity partners, and then there's senior associates and junior associates and paralegals and secretaries and mailroom and receptionists and maids and the whole catastrophe of hierarchy. But when we did an analysis and I looked at it, I discovered there was one employee group that was most important. Who was that employee group?
The secretaries.
Bingo. Why? Why?
Front line. They see the...
Because they make you look good.
Yeah. And they talk to the customer or clients more than I do.
Right.
Every client talked to my secretary first, 100% of the time. And if I was on the phone, their conversation was longer than my conversation was because I was talking to somebody else, right? That person was also the interface with my family. When my wife or my kids called and I was busy in a meeting or on the phone, who'd they talk to? They talked to Lachelle, right? And when a guest came in, they came in and the first person they were greeted by is one of those people. So what became clear to me was I needed to stop pandering to my prima donna equity partners I love them very dearly, and we spent a lot of time together. But I had to convince them of what I became aware of, and that is our secretaries became our most valuable employees, our most valuable assets. And guess what? Among the many things we did were big important things and then little things. And it wasn't the money, although the money helps, but it wasn't the money that drove the behavior. You know what? One of the simplest things we did that drove behavior? We didn't call them secretaries anymore. We called them EAs, executive assistants. Nothing changed in their job description except the title, right? But that meant something, and that was valuable. Now, I'm not trying to suggest to you that that was the most valuable thing. There were other things we did. But here's what I am trying to suggest to you. Within your diocese, your eminence, within your parishes, brother clergy, within your parish councils and your diocesan council, brother and sister laity, there are things that make things happen. There are people that make things happen. When you provide disproportionate effort and energy and focus on those things that make things happen, great things happen as a result in all other areas. It's the reason why, you know, when my kids were younger, we had one of those magnets on the refrigerator that said, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. Okay, so you just need to understand your prioritization in this regard, okay? Steve Jobs talked about it in the context of being a yardstick of quality. And he said, some people aren't used to an environment where excellence is expected. Now, this is it sounds like a nice little piece of pablum in the business world. Please understand the love in my heart for sharing this with you. Excellence is not expected in church world, the way we're operating it and managing it. Excellence is not expected. We allow to exist in our churches things we would never allow if we were in our businesses or, frankly, in our personal family lives. We would never allow those things. And in order for us to take the next level, then we have to create a standard of excellence that is expected and is clear and is communicated lovingly, caringly, supportively, nurturingly, but unequivocally clear. And when that level of excellence is communicated and absolutely implemented, then you will see transformation in every way you can do it. I'll give you one more analogy. I go back to the best coach that ever existed, Coach Wooden at UCLA. Back in the day, now they would never do this nowadays some places, but back in the day, and you can imagine now, we're talking about 30, 40 years ago, Coach Wooden required all of his players to wear coats and ties while they were traveling to go to whatever game they were going to play in. Whether they were traveling on a bus or on an airplane or whatever, they were in coats and ties. There was a critical game that was going to decide whether UCLA was going to make it into the NCAAs. And his starting center, his most important player, the guy that he could count on more than anything, a guy by the name of Bill Walton, shows up to board the bus to go to the airplane, and he doesn't have a coat and tie on. Now, Coach Wooden has to make a decision. He needs Bill Walton to win this game. I mean, he ain't going to win the game without Walton, in all likelihood, right? But he said, this is what it means to be a representative of UCLA. When you are wearing the UCLA jersey on the court, that's one thing, but you never take the UCLA jersey off in everything you do. Now think about that. Where else do we think about that? Being an Orthodox Christian, right? You cannot just be an Orthodox Christian for the hour and a half on Sunday and call yourself an Orthodox Christian if the rest of the 168 hours of the week, you're a horrible human being. Coach Wooden said to Bill Walton, if you can get to your apartment and get a coat and tie and figure out a cab to meet us at the airport, you can come with us. If not, you're not playing. Bill Walton, after winning all these awards, Player of the Year and all that kind of stuff, told the story that single message, that single experience let him understand what excellence meant in one definition. Now, did it really mean he was a better player? No, it didn't really impact his play at all. But that was the standard of behavior that was expected of a UCLA basketball player, and there were no exceptions to that. What if, just hypothetically, what if we did what our Lord taught us to do and said with great clarity, this is what it means to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, that you have love for one another as I have loved you. Period, full stop, end of discussion. And that's the only standard that applies. If you falter from that, I love you, I respect you, I'm there for you, but you haven't met the standard. And so we have to embrace the notion of stop making excuses. Oh, well, they don't want to show up, or they don't want to send their kids, or maybe if we can just cut the services down to 15 minutes, maybe they'll show up and stuff like that. No, I'm sorry. That doesn't mean we don't listen to them, and if there's accommodations we can make, we do it. Of course we should do all those things. But we have to set expectations. Last example, this is a church example. There is, if you look at all Christian churches in America, and I don't want to get into a theological argument about whether this is a Christian church or not, because there is a legitimate argument there, but I don't want to get into it. Every major denomination has experienced, for the most part, there's some exceptions, year-on-year declines in membership. Every one of them. There was one year where there was massive Hispanic immigration, and there was a slight uptick in the Roman Catholic Church. But all the rest of the years it was down. Orthodox Church, down. Jewish tradition, down. And they're not Christian, but, you know, Protestant, Episcopalians, Presbyterians, Baptists, Southern Baptists, every one of them down with one exception. Christian now, which is the one exception. And again, the Mormons. Now, again, we can get into a theoretical argument, or a theological argument as to whether they truly are Christians. They call themselves Christians. They think of themselves as Christians. Okay. And in fact, if you look at it, the Mormon church was invented. So that tells you a lot about that church, but it was invented in the mid 1800s, right? And they wandered around in the wilderness for about 30 or 40 years until they eventually found themselves in the Utah area and other places. And so around the turn of the century, the Mormon church was finally found a home. Well, what else happened around the turn of the century? Last century, not this one. The Orthodox Church arrives in the United States. So let's do a quick little case study. The Orthodox Church right now, you saw the data from before, from 2010, is down to about 815,000 members. During that same period of time, the Mormon Church has grown to over 6.3 million members and is growing anywhere between 1.5 to 3.2, 3.4% a year, compounded year after year after year after year. And when you look at it, you have to scratch your head and say, wait a minute, I don't get this. They don't have the right theology. They don't have a truly Christian base. They are not the original church of Jesus Christ. How in the world can they be growing and we be either declining or being stagnant in that regard? Well, there's a lot of answers to that question. But among the few that are most meaningful is they have clear expectations of what does it mean to be a Mormon. And they are unapologetic about it. They're unapologetic about it. They require that their youth give 1 or 2 years of service to the church. One day I was taking a shuttle bus from a Greek Orthodox church remote parking lot to their Greek festival. And on the bus, I'm in shorts and t-shirts because it's summertime, and on the bus are 5 young men in black suits and white shirts and ties with books. I went up to them, I said, hey, welcome, what's going on? 2 of them had just graduated high school, 2 of them had just graduated college, one was taking a break in his college career. They were Mormon youth in their year of service to the church, bringing the Book of Mormon to a Greek Orthodox church festival, and our kids were on the stage dancing. Now, there's nothing wrong with dancing. But in the meantime, those kids were there living their faith. In my 36 plus years of practicing law, I was fortunate to sell a bunch of companies. I did mergers and acquisitions law. Twice I sold companies that were owned by Mormons. The last one, like a year or 2 before I retired, it was a pretty good payday. The guy made $300 million. When I asked for the wire transfer instructions for him to get the wire transfer from the purchaser of $300 million, he gave me 2 sets of wire instructions. The first one was for his Mormon temple that was going to get the first $30 million. And the second one was for his pocketbook where the other $270 million were going to go in. Unapologetic, these are our expectations, this is what it means. And this from a group of people that we would argue perhaps aren't really Christians in the way we think about them. So I want to leave you with this concept, because when we come back after dinner, which we're going to do, we're going to take the dinner break right now. What we're going to start to focus on is what are lead and lag measures in the context of the 2 areas that you have chosen. How would they apply in an Orthodox church ecosystem, and particularly an OCA ecosystem? And as you can see by the thing on the screen here, I'm going to use as an example one that we just completed a week or two ago for the Diocese of New England. And I'm just going to use that as an example. I chose one that I anticipated you would not choose, and indeed you did not choose it, so that's fine. But I'm going to show you an example. And Your Eminence, when you get done seeing this example, you will see a perfectly laid out roadmap, step by step by step by step, how you and the group are going to achieve the incredible, important, transformational aspect of working on clergy development and laity development. And in the meantime, what I want you to think about is we are transforming ourselves to create high expectations, not the expectations that His Eminence did or as His Beatitude did, or certainly not this, chucklehead lawyer in the South Bill Marianis did, but the expectations that our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ called us to lead to. And with that, Your Eminence, would you please lead us in a prayer for dinner? You're going to take your dinner break right now, and when you come back, we're going to ask you to it's 5:30ish your time. We're going to ask you to come back at 6:30, give you the full dinner break over here, and we're going to ask you to lead us in prayer.
Okay. O Lord Jesus Christ, our God, bless the food, fellowship, and drink of your servants for your holy always, now and ever, and unto ages of ages.
Amen.
Amen. All right, again, we're going to stop the recording.